speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. What was the role of courts during the corona pandemic? How was the role of the courts during the corona pandemic? What do the country's eminent lawyers and jurists feel about the role of the courts during the corona pandemic? This is what we are going to discuss today. I have a very eminent panel to discuss with me today. I have with me senior advocate Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi. He's a third term sitting member of parliament in the Rajya Sabha, eminent jurist. He's also served as the additional Solicitor General of India. I have with me senior advocate Mukul Rohatgi. We all know he served as the Attorney General of India, one of the country's foremost advocates. I have with me senior advocate Pinaki Mishra. He's the leader of the House for the BJD in the Lok Sabha. He's a sitting Lok Sabha MP and also punches equally good in the courts. Very well known senior advocate, eminent jurist. Thank you so much. I have with me senior advocate Parag Tripathi, commerce, business. You take it. His name is up in the courts. Many times he can be seen arguing against either Mr. Rohatgi or Dr. Singhvi in many of the cases. Thank you so much for joining us. Senior advocate Parag Tripathi has also served as the additional Solicitor General of India. Mr. Ryan Karanjawala, managing partner Karanjawala and Company, one of India's foremost litigation law firms. Thank you, Mr. Karanjawala. Thank you all of you for sparing time. And let's get to the topic straight. May I request Senior Advocate Pinaki Mishra to open the debate with his opening comment on this issue, role of courts during the corona crisis.
Look, there's a very heavy onus that's fallen on the courts, I think, during this corona crisis. And, because I straddle both the courts as well as the legislature, I have to say with some degree of dismay that, and I think Dr. Singhvi there will bear me out, that the legislature in India has actually played a very, very low-key role through this corona crisis. Parliament has barely met. And when it's met, it has been very truncated sessions. So basically, just a basic parliament sessions have been conducted for the last year's budget, the monsoon, as well as the winter session, and this year's budget sessions. They've been very, very perfunctory sessions. So there has been no legislature virtually, for the asking. There have been collapse of other systems as well. I think there is a cabinet system in our country, which I think everybody by and large recognizes is virtually non-functional. It's a totally centralized PMO, and therefore the cabinet system is not functional. There is a bureaucracy which is very, very committed to the Prime Minister's office, but many say rather meritless because tilted towards a particular section. There are other constitutional authorities which have been mandated to act as guardians of the law. The CAG, for instance, the Election Commission of India, the Fourth Estate, you yourself, the press, all of them have, I think, functioned at less than a par during this period. And therefore, there's been a very heavy onus on the judiciary. I think last year, during the first attack of the COVID in India, the judiciary was found to be, for lack of a better word, I don't know, some said it was timid. I thought it was gullible. I thought they took the government too much at face value, notably when the government informed the courts that there were actually no migrant labor on the streets or on the roads or on the highways going back, when actually every day we were seeing in the media there were hundreds and thousands of people who were on the roads. The courts took notably the Chief Justice's court, took the government assurance at face value, and everybody thought that was completely misconceived. But since then, I think everybody recognizes that in the second phase now, gradually, the high courts particularly have had their ADM Jabalpur moment. I think the high courts have really stepped up to the plate. The Delhi High Court, Allahabad High Court, Madras High Court, Karnataka High Court, all of them have, among other high courts, taken the government very strongly to task for its inaction during COVID times. And I think the Supreme Court now, we have a new Chief Justice. He's been very proactive as well. And I think he has a stellar track record. So the Supreme Court too now appears to be asking some very searching questions of the government. So therefore, that's really a mixed bag so far as far as the courts are concerned. But as I said, there's a very heavy responsibility which was, I think, bestowed on the courts. And as a result, they've struggled a bit in these very trying circumstances.
And point well taken. I'll go to Mr. Ryan Karanjawala for his opening comment.
Well, Tarun, what I did was I said, in order to sort of prepare myself for the debate, I sort of called for and read through the orders of the Delhi High Court in Rakesh Malhotra's case. And after reading those orders, I have no doubt in my mind that the city of Delhi owes that particular bench of Justice Vipin Sanghi and Justice Rekha Palli a collective salute. And the city of Delhi owes them a debt of deep gratitude. Because if you go through the order, you find, people who read the newspapers and have an overall view think that it was only about oxygen. It was certainly about oxygen, but it was about much more. They stepped in, they revived that particular matter, which had sort of closed in January. They stepped in on the 19th of April. And if you remember, 19th of April was the time at which Delhi was beginning to peak. It had just started the peak. And I mean, according to me, the dam would have burst had the court not stepped in and collectively tried to stem it. For example, there was a fight going on between the Delhi state government and the central government as to how much oxygen Delhi needed. We were facing a situation where a particular hospital in Delhi, Batra Hospital, people died because of a lack, because suddenly the oxygen masks that were giving them oxygen stopped because there was a lack of oxygen. The High Court stepped in here and passed various orders as far as oxygen is concerned. The first thing they did was they said, okay, look, you are diverting this oxygen to industrial use. Stop it here, stop it now, send it for medical use. Then there was a question of the oxygen coming through different states. They passed directions to that effect. And if you study their order, Tarun, you'll find that they were not only dealing with oxygen. Even on the first day, that is the 19th, they dealt with the migrant worker situation. As Pinaki has explained to you in the earlier situation, the migrant workers were having a chaotic time. Here they pointed out to the state government. Now they pulled up the state government and said, you had collected a cess. The cess that you collected was for construction. Use that money to see that the migrant worker who stays behind is fed. Use the people you use for the midday school meal to see that those same people are utilized in order to ensure that the midday meal reaches the migrant worker. They also dealt, and I will deal with it as we go along. They also dealt with the question of medicines. A lot of people had been hoarding certain medicines, they had been seized. They immediately passed orders that no, don't seize them, don't treat them as case property, let them be released so that people get these medicines. There was an aspect of remdesivir, where the question was that remdesivir was allowed to be manufactured only for the purpose of export. They stepped in there and said, no, now let this be utilized. So you see, if you study those orders, you will see that the Delhi High Court, especially in this particular case, played a stellar role. At one stage, people were worried and people were frightened that suddenly all these matters would be shifted to the Supreme Court and then a hodgepodge would be created. Fortunately, as a result, I think Mukul was one of the people who had also made a statement saying that the matter should remain in the Delhi High Court. Fortunately, better sense prevailed in the Supreme Court. Justice Chandrachud came to preside over a bench. And now they are working, so to speak, in tandem. In areas where the Delhi High Court can't reach so effectively, the Supreme Court steps in, or the other high courts can't reach so effectively, the Supreme Court steps in and cures the problems. So I think, frankly, the whole city owes the courts, the Delhi High Court and the Supreme Court, a collective salute and a real debt of gratitude. That is my frank opening remark.
Collective salute and a real debt of gratitude is what Mr. Karanjawala says. Moving on, we'll go to Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi for his opening comment.
Tarun, I think we have to just look at it the way I would like to look at it is, one is at the technical level. How has the court system as an institution functioned? And the other is in its judicial content level. So there are two levels at which the court functions. Now, I find an interesting and ironical set of contrasts. Let's take technically. Technically, the Supreme Court as an institution, as a third or fourth organ of state, has actually functioned much better. As parliamentarians, both Pinaki and I know that when you need not have had parliament in March of 20, Parliament was insisted on going on. Even masks were prohibited. People have forgotten that. And when you should or could have had Parliament, as the Supreme Court was having virtual hearings, and there's no reason why an Indian Parliament cannot have virtual hearing, there was none. And therefore, between 24, about 18 or 20 months, we've had hardly in all, maybe 1 month of sittings, if you add up, or maybe 2 months of sittings. So clearly, in that sense, the Supreme Court has fared much better. The irony is that the Supreme Court has functioned subnormally and subpar, even in its technical sittings. And let me tell you, a lot of the angst today in the bar, who consider this panel an elite set of lawyers, who consider a large number of Supreme Court advocates an elite set of advocates, is because the Supreme Court, and which has done much better than the other organs of governance in terms of technical sitting, has had far fewer courts functioning, far fewer cases, no regulars, far fewer lawyers, far fewer hours per day, and far fewer days. Now, I find a contradiction there that once you have, and this has been right through from 20 March to about now, recently. Now, if you once accept virtual hearing, there is a full contradiction as to why the virtual hearing is not exploited to a full. Why have such fewer hours? Why are you anxious to go back? Why not have all benches? And I think that has led to a lot of angst amongst the not so good lawyers, the have-nots, and I can understand that pain. You must not forget that. Now, the only answer to this question which I'm raising, if you can't function 100%, the court should have functioned at 90%, maybe 80%. They've actually functioned at 33 to 45%. Now, the question is, the only legitimate defense to this could be that, look, during COVID, we all need staff and we cannot have staff. And I think that's a very legitimate point. But then if you have large amount of e-work or paperless court work, and some benches in the Supreme Court are doing it, many in the High Court are doing it, well, there was, I think, jolly well incumbent that by the middle of last year, they had to get their act together to make sure that you could have paperless work. Arguments can be heard on soft copies. And, this lugging around of files and having staff coming in and out need not be there. Today, also, they are functioning with limited staff, but they still have staff at their home because they have physical files being lugged. So I think these are things which the court should have, because this basic complaint against letting down the many Indias in one, the Indias which are the Indias of less fortunate lawyers and litigants, is a very major complaint. Now let me turn quickly to the judicial side. In the judicial side, on the whole, I think the Supreme Court performance has been extremely disappointing, though clearly phase 2 has been better than phase 1. And equally, on the whole, the high courts have been outstandingly better. However, in both levels, I think they have to realize that they are, all of them, and this applies to whether Supreme Court or High Court with the best of intentions, they have to keep up with a very fast and a swift enemy. The rapidity and swiftness of COVID, which is the enemy, is far faster and higher than the rapidity and swiftness of dispensation of justice by courts, be it Supreme Court or High Court. So by the time you actually deal with an issue, except in some cases, that events have overtaken that issue. And I think that is what courts have to realize. I mean, sometimes they can't do it. I don't blame them, because sometimes the issues take time, notice has to be issued, etc. But that has been a major problem. So I would say you have to look at it in the institutional sense and the judicial sense, and you have to have the remedial measure, which I'm sure we'll discuss later on these aspects.
Point taken. Thank you, Dr. Singhvi. Mr. Nair, what do you have to say about the role of COVID courts during the corona crisis?
I think the role of the high courts in particular has been very exemplary during the corona crisis. Take the example of Bombay, take the example of Delhi, take the example of Madras. Generally, the high courts, I think, have been very supportive and have been very heads-on insofar as their corona response is concerned. Unfortunately, I don't share the same sentiment insofar as the Supreme Court is concerned. Justice Bobade almost stayed all proceedings in various high courts just on the eve of his retirement. So if we look at the role of the high courts over the course of the pandemic, they have actually handheld the respective governments so as to bring about a good solution to the problem.
And what about, because since you practice in Delhi, could you delve in a minute on the role of the Delhi High Court?
So Delhi High Court, in fact, although it's exceptionally dear to me because I'm predominantly practicing there, but I think Delhi itself has done very well. We have this oxygen bench presided over by Justice Sanghi, and that bench did a remarkable job because it ensured that during the tussle between the central government and the Delhi government, oxygen was being delivered to hospitals. I know midnight sittings, evening sittings, the bench actually ensured that oxygen reached. And I must single out a single judge of the Delhi High Court, Justice Pratibha Singh, who actually ensured that people get admission in hospitals, who ensured people get medicines. Now this kind of commitment from judges is completely unprecedented. But these were strange times, these were exceptional times, and that is why it warranted exceptional handling, as the Delhi judges have shown in the present case.
Now we'll go to Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi for his opening comment.
Yeah, Tarun, this is a very difficult area. You see, judiciary as an institution, it has been referred to sometimes as the most reluctant branch. This is not the area of operation of judiciary. This is supposed to be dealt with by the legislature and certainly by the executive. In India, the problem is that these aspects have not been so dealt with by the legislature and the executive. And in addition, you have had these huge fault lines in India's political federalism. Therefore, judiciary had to step in. Now, judicial stepping in has two implications. One is for the institution of judiciary itself, which some of our friends spoke of, and one is the national, on the entire national level. Now, as far as the national level is concerned, I agree with all our speakers that the courts have really, on the whole, done a great job. And perhaps, as one of the speakers said, we had the ADM Jabalpur moment in a way where the Delhi High Court in particular, which is my parent High Court, and several of the other High Courts, took on the cudgels as, if I may use the expression, institutional COVID warriors, and they put things in order and sort of dealt with it at great length. Having said that, when it comes to the judicial functioning of the judiciary or the institutional functioning of the judiciary within its accepted realm, that is not as a reluctant or residual institution which steps in when other institutions fail to function as they're supposed to function. For instance, there was no need for court's intervention really if oxygen had been properly distributed. There was no need for the court to have stepped in, and so many other aspects. Now, at the judicial institution functional level, it's not merely a question of staff. It is also, I think, a question of familiarity with the new technology, because we at the bar, quite apart from the distinguished panelists which I have here, my co-panelists here, at the bar as well, and if you particularly go down to the bars at the district court and outside Delhi in the districts, are not at all conversant with these new technologies. So even if this problem of increasing the workload in a court would probably be an answer to the Supreme Court and some of the high courts. And I say some of the high courts because I have friends who practice in Allahabad High Court. There I'm told, not taking a name, any of the high courts which are away from the four big metropolitan high courts, they say that there is a huge amount of mental barrier in dealing with new technology. So really speaking, it is a difficult situation. And yes, there was a sense of unhappiness which people had in the manner in which during the first phase, the matter had been dealt with, particularly by the apex court. But then I think as we learn as an institution and a nation, I think we are moving in the right direction. But we have to remember that these are extraordinary times. This is a fast and furious enemy. And it's easy in a sense to be, for want of better word, judgmental on the activities of all institutions, including whether it is legislative or executive. But at the same time, of course, this would not take away from the very important fact that judiciary was forced to step in in an area which is really not their domain as far as dealing with COVID was concerned. And particularly the high courts have done really a yeoman's service.
Point well taken, Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. I'll go to Senior Advocate Mukul Rohatgi. Sir, your opening comment. You're not audible.
You're mute.
First of all, let us remind ourselves of the role of the courts, and mainly the constitutional courts, that is the High Court and the Supreme Court. They are often called the upholders of the Constitution, defenders of the Constitution, protectors of the Constitution. One of the most cherished fundamental rights in the Constitution is a person will not be deprived of his life or liberty except according to a procedure established by law. So life and liberty of people in India, not restricted only to citizens, is one of the cherished goals of the Constitution. It is the job of the government of the day to uphold this right, to see that nobody dies in a wanton or a reckless fashion, and nobody is deprived of his liberty in the same manner. Since the government was unable to deal with the crisis, the government was in a position of a deer who is transfixed in the lights of an oncoming vehicle. So there was paralysis. Somebody had to jolt the government, that is the bureaucracy and the political class, out of this paralysis. Things were going haywire. So the courts had to speak. That was the duty of the court. And I must say the mettle of the court is judged by the extraordinary times that they enter. Mr. Mishra spoke of ADM Jabalpur. That's a correct example. The High Courts showed their mettle then, and the Supreme Court faltered. This time around, the Supreme Court faltered in the first phase. I agree with all the speakers in agreeing to accept the view of the government that there are no migrants in the month of May 2020. But the second time round, the courts have bucked up, and full credit to the High Courts to start with. And let me tell you, I agree with Ryan. The last 2-3 days of the earlier Chief Justice's tenure, it was clear to me that there was a move to transfer the High Court matters to the Supreme Court. That is why I and some other lawyers openly said that this should not be done. The Supreme Court then realized and said we never wanted to do it. So that is it, and that ended. The High Courts have done a great job. I don't want to delve into the same details as my friends on the panel have said. But I want to say something specially about Allahabad High Court. All the High Courts have been dealing with the factum of supply of oxygen, creating oxygen, transportation of drugs, hoarding, etc., etc. But one thing I must say, extraordinary situations warrant extraordinary remedies. Sometimes by crossing the barrier. If you remember, about a month ago, Allahabad High Court said that COVID was spreading like wildfire in UP, and UP was far behind, say, Delhi or Bombay, in terms of medical apparatus and hospitals. And the government was backtracking from putting down a serious or a heavy lockdown. The Allahabad High Court said that let there be a lockdown for a week or so in 4 or 5 towns. Obviously, technically, it is not the job of the High Court to do it. But as I said, extraordinary situations warrant extraordinary remedies. That was done. But promptly, the Supreme Court, the next day, suspended the order of the High Court. Probably on the technical ground that the High Court has crossed it's Lakshman Rekha. The Supreme Court should have realized that if this was the need of the hour and the executive was not functioning, heavens would not have fallen if for 5 days or 7 days a lockdown would have been imposed in five cities. Lockdown has been imposed all over the country. So that is where I think the Supreme Court faltered in telling the High Court that it crossed a Lakshman Rekha. Now, I want to say something also in favor of the government. See, it's all very well for everybody to slam the government. Every newspaper has slammed the government. All of us here are slamming the government. But you know, after the first 2 weeks or 20 days or so, when the High Court was jolting them, asking them to put their act together, certainly in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, say from about 5th or 6th of May, the government and the bureaucracy has put their act together. We don't have cries of oxygen available for 1 hour or 2 hours in the last 3 weeks. Things have kind of come about. We are reasonably at a decent kind of a position with the peak going down. So they did buck up. They should have bucked up in the past. They should have put their things in order, say in December or November. But be that as it may, a lot of lives have been lost. So collectively, the courts have played a great role. It was required of the courts. And I would say, not only what Ryan said, that citizens of Delhi will salute the court. I would say citizens of the country would salute the courts and their respective courts, with the Supreme Court today giving a pat on the back of the High Courts and saying that we will not stop the High Courts. And we will reach out where the High Courts are deficient because on interstate issues, only the Supreme Court can do it and not the High Court. So I think today it's going on in a decently well-oiled fashion as of now. But obviously, much is yet to be conquered. The second aspect I want to say is on what Dr. Singhvi said regarding the working of the courts, the percentage of working, so to say. I would tend to agree with Parag that it is not very easy for the entire judiciary from the Mufassil Court to the Supreme Court, which has been accustomed in the last 100 years to a particular system of physical presentation of papers in courts and all that, and lawyers, to suddenly in a span of a few months convert completely into a virtual mode. So the first problem is the issue of connectivity, infrastructure, wavelength, etc., in having it. Now, even assume that you can have it in a year or two, we still don't have it all over the country. There are constraints. I'm not on budgetary constraints. Second is, as Parag rightly said, you see, people like us, and I am not ashamed to say that till this pandemic started, I was a novice in operating a laptop or a iPad. I could barely do it. So similarly, judges of the higher courts who are between 45 to 55 and Supreme Court between 55 to 65, who may not be savvy with these technologies, to suddenly change over and argue everything from a file. Now a file can in the Supreme Court can have 2,000 pages, and you say turn to page 647. It is not very easy for somebody to turn to 647. Even I find it difficult. It will take time. So it is not possible to work at 80%. There is some reasonableness in the angst of the bar that a lot of people, a lot of young lawyers in different parts of India are not able to access. They don't understand the technology, etc., etc. That's why this angst is there. Will probably go away soon after some more months pass, and if this pandemic still goes on. But it is true that the Supreme Court could have worked, or the High Courts could have worked at a slightly better percentage or rate. But I don't think it can be 90 or 80. An appropriate probably would be about 50. But to cut the long story short, I think we have our courts, the government, bureaucracy has now come to grips with the pandemic, and they are cautiously watching and extending it month by month. And God willing, we will soon be out of it in the next 2 or 3 months. So then I'll be able to meet all the panelists in the Supreme Court over a cup of coffee.
Dr. Singhvi, the Nagpur bench of the Bombay High Court had directed the Maharashtra government to provide 10,000 vials of remdesivir, a crucial antiviral drug. This was in response to a PL which was filed, and it was arranged within a matter of hours. A lot of lives may have been saved because of the medicine. The Delhi High Court also undertook similar endeavors. I would like to point out, especially Delhi High Court saying, beg, borrow or steal, it's a national emergency, said the division bench of Justices Vipin Sanghi and Rekha Palli, Justice Rekha Palli. Later you see people were helped. What do you make of such urgent interventions of the court to really get help to the people who would have died in absence of medicines or oxygen? You're not audible.
It is obvious that extraordinary emergencies will suspend the normal laws and limits of judicial review. In a normal time, if you were to say buy this or not buy this, you would obviously react negatively. But nobody says that because A, they are all very well intentioned. Even the erroneous ones, even the overbroad ones, even the over-intrusive ones are all very well intentioned. Secondly, it is ultimately required, and people tend to forget, one, it is required to jolt certain sections of the bureaucracy. Other times, certain sections of the executive government for higher policy matters. Not only out of their sleepiness, but out of to expedite the pace. The pace is naturally slow, so you require these court orders. Thirdly, what is important is that these court orders have natural inertia. Bureaucracy would take time. Take a very small little but very good example. Some of these drugs were available but were subjected to such large import duties that there was a big deterrent. And that is particularly true of a drug, God forbid, which we need if and when the third wave comes. Now, what the High Court did was they cannot give a mandamus saying do not have a duty. So they've just done a very simple and a right thing at this time, that till you take a policy decision, because the government has to go through a certain process, and that process will take time. And even if the government moves fast, which it may try to do, there is still duty. So they said till such time imports are allowed without duty on bond. And the bond will preserve the right to recover the duty in case a duty is levied. Now, this kind of ironing out of immediacies is vitally necessary, and only the court can do it. Number 4, I think very important what is happening, moving ahead from your part 1, is what some of these courts, especially the Delhi High Court, is doing, is it is now planning for the future. I think that's important. You know, a lot of the ease we feel today is not because the government has done anything great, but because the lockdown has helped, positivity rates are a little lower, oxygen is more available, beds are less occupied, etc. So what some of these courts are doing rightly is saying, look, you will immediately fall into your usual self-congratulatory back thumping. What have you done for a, God forbid, third wave? What have you done for the fungus? What have you done for amphotericin B? And so on and so forth. Now, these are futuristic, deadly and nightmare scenarios, but they are something we cannot, like an ostrich in the sand, escape. So I think this prodding is extremely important. Some of it is being done very well by the Delhi High Court, and I think it makes every state, not only Delhi, prepared much better for the future. I'll just take 2 or 3 more points to very quickly end. I think we should talk about remedial measures also. Now, on the structural side, I think there is a bit of a cross purpose because we are mixing the normative and the positive. We know that there is psychological disability or hesitation in technology. The point is, normatively, why should it be there after 1 year of COVID? You are supposed to have had virtual hearings, and you jolly well have to get over that, and you have to sit, if not at 33 or 40%, you have to try for 60, 65% sitting. So I think 2 or 3 things straight away. One, you have to ramp up capacity hugely in terms of technology. There is many Indias in one. Lower courts capacities, even in prime cities like Delhi, is very different from what High Court has. And that's very different from what district courts outside in rural India have. So I think that has to be physically, technologically ramped up. I think there is ground and there is merit today in trying to go on a drive from district-wise and for each court or for each bar association, with whatever mix you can of logistics, why not start vaccinating on a war scale? And I'm not talking governmental. I mean, governmental will happen, take time. These associations and the bars, 3 categories, forget the judges, lawyers, clerks, and some of the other staff, I mean, drivers and everybody else. If you start vaccinating on a big scale, that is the way to go forward. And I don't think it's impossible to do, especially in the more well-off areas like Delhi. It is something we have to ramp up, along with ramping up the technology, ramping up of vaccination, and I think ramping up also of some uniformity in platforms. We have a bewildering array from Blue Jeans in Andhra to Cisco WebEx in Delhi, which I believe personally is the best. I don't know what the panel feels. To video and the others in Supreme Court, which I believe is not so good. But this bewildering diversity also doesn't help. I think you need to have 1 or maximum 2 and tried and tested. We should know by now in 2 years' time what is good. Last but not the least, I have been a votary of this for some time, and let me repeat this. It's all good. All of us have eleemosynary instincts and charitable instincts. All of us help in whatever way we can by giving money, by giving other services, etc. And that's very good. I don't think the bar or the leaders of the bar have ever been found wanting in that regard. But I think, that is the more sensational element, and it doesn't collect much. You try and milk just 10 people, 100 people, that doesn't work. Why is it not possible with some sanction, and lawyers know how best to do it, for each bar association to levy a graded hierarchy of charges on every member? It can be 1,000, 10,000, 1 lakh, and 10 lakh, depending on how you grade it. I mean, the grading, or you can have 3 categories. The detail is not a matter I'm going into. But, 100 to 1,000 to 500 rupees per person collected will make a huge anti-COVID kitty. And that should be administered by a high-powered committee at each level only for 3 things. Medical for the lawyers, education, and rental. You'll be surprised how much pitiable and pathos you find out there on these 3 fronts. Of course, there can be many more uses, but there should be this, call it a cess, call it a levy, call it a tax, by whatever means called. We should do this, and that will be a very great help across the bar. And this can be done and replicated for smaller amounts right across India for every bar.
Point well taken. We hope that the bar associations do take note of, especially the last point that Dr. Singhvi shared with all of us. I'll go to Senior Advocate Pinaki Mishra at this point. You see what happened in Gujarat. The High Court told the Gujarat state government that you should have the responsibility to ensure that there is seamless supply of remdesivir, and you frame a policy for it. So you see that this High Court was actually directing the states to frame policy. Now you have this unique exposure. You do policy making where you're part of the Lok Sabha. You also argue in the courts. Why did this need arise where the courts had to direct the government to, okay, frame policy for this? We shouldn't need to tell you. You should do this on your own.
Look, I think I mentioned that in my opening statement in the first part, Tarun. There is no doubt that this government has been ill-served, and that's the only charitable explanation I can give. It has been very ill-served by the bulwark of the bureaucracy, which is meant to aid and advise the government in its functioning. And that, as I said, has largely been because probably their own fault that they've relied on just a very small section of the bureaucracy, and the loyalty has been the premium factor rather than competence. And as a result, things that should have been advised to the government by experts, by epidemiologists, by people who really, the Niti Aayog, these are bodies which I think the government and the Prime Minister particularly hoped and depended on for their aid and advice. The Prime Minister constituted several of these very high-powered committees, all of which seem to have failed both him and the country. And today, therefore, we are in this situation where the courts are increasingly, as all our co-panelists have felt, are increasingly called upon to step in and prod the government, prod the bureaucracy to act in what should be their due diligence, by in due diligence, their normal functioning. I'm sorry to say this, but today we are a pariah state internationally. And I am very pessimistic that I don't think this pandemic is going away in a hurry, number one. Number two, if you see today's Time magazine article that I was just seeing in the morning, India is now being blamed for being an international pariah in this regard, because we have not only not vaccinated ourselves, we have also derailed the entire international COVAX policy, because all the vaccines which were supposed to be sent out of India to places like Africa, Central America, etc., where it is solely needed, it's being stopped because we didn't wake up in time. And I believe that's because the experts in India did not do what was their bounden duty to do. Just one very quick thing, and I think all my co-panelists will agree with me on this. I remember Mr. Arun Jaitley, late departed, common friend of everybody on this panel, used to talk about the unelected tyranny of the courts. And he felt that, and very, very often in private, he's told me that, as have indeed all law ministers since 1996 that I've been in Parliament, they've been saying the same thing, that I think we should release the animal spirit and energy of the high courts by bringing the age of retirement of the high courts at par with the Supreme Court. I think all my co-panelists will agree with me. This is time that the government does this. They should all be retiring at 65 so that the high courts have such incredible animal spirit and such incredible sense of timing, because they are really far more rooted to the ground reality in their states. And as you said, the Gujarat High Court immediately knew what was the immediacy of the problem and worked there. So therefore, these high courts should all be, I think judges should be retiring at 65 in order that they don't have this sense that because they may have to go to the Supreme Court and there would be a chance to go to the Supreme Court, that they must kowtow, therefore, and look to what the Supreme Court will eventually want them to decide. They must decide as the exigency demands. That is the need of the hour. And I think all my co-panelists will be one with me that this is a judicial reform that is long, long overdue, that must be immediately brought about. It's the need of the hour.
Just a small footnote before you ask the next person to what Pinaki said. I think he has forgotten. I had the privilege of chairing the this committee.
Yes.
My friend was a member. And one of the things we did, I think he was still then a member, perhaps to the later phase, was to reiterate the most silly and illogical rule of the 62 to 65 arbitrage must be abolished. And we sent questioners across, just as a footnote. And obviously there are lots of reasons to say it's the most silly rule, because there is no logical difference. It is not that there is a longevity difference or capacity difference between 62 and 65 judges. And it encourages a whole amount of, servile behavior. But one of the interesting responses we received from high quarters, I will not name them, was that, yes, that's a good idea, but why don't you make Supreme Court 67 simultaneously? Now, this is the whole point. There is this status, even today, when you go, either the Supreme Court will want 67 or the bureaucracy says, no problem, please extend, but we should also be 62 or we should also be 65.
Point.
And that is why this arbitrage, the first report we studied, I think was probably 20, 30 years old. It continues till today, despite our own committee report, of which I was the chair and Mr. Mishra was a member.
Point well taken. And as an aside, if I may say that if anyone on this panel becomes a law minister, I think this issue would be taken up. Now into the second question. Mr. Nayyar, you know that in the part one also we delved briefly into the role of Delhi High Court. Why Delhi High Court in a sense stood out? It was discussed all over the country. Why do you think the Delhi High Court stood out in its handling of the COVID crisis?
I think the basic thing is that the response by Delhi was immediate. So whereas other high courts did struggle, but the Delhi's response was very immaculate and almost immediate. For instance, as I said in the first part of the show, to ensure that oxygen actually reaches hospitals when people were dying and crying out for the same is a remarkable thing. Actually, left to the respective governments, it won't really have happened. Then more people would have died. But the proactive fashion in which the bench acted in ensuring oxygen reaching, I think that is the single most thing which turns out in the present case. And as I said in the first show, the single judge like Justice Singh also, I mean, it was not her function to ensure admission in hospitals for people, but that shows the human nature of the judge. That shows the nature of our court, that its response was immediate and very, very proactive.
Mr. Karanjawala, the Andhra Pradesh High Court on 22nd April asked the state government to file a comprehensive affidavit with regard to the steps that they are taking to, in a sense, deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. The Andhra Pradesh High Court, and if I may mention Justice Arup Kumar Goswami and Justice C. Praveen Kumar, they asked details from the state government on testing facilities, etc. So they were going that, they wanted things to get better. Do you think, in a sense, the judiciary hand-held the government into helping people in this pandemic?
What was your question? Do you think what? The judiciary?
Hand-held the government or nudged the government to make things better? Because as Mr. Rohgi said, it was as if that, someone saw a high beam light and it was difficult to react. He put it something like that.
So Tarun, to answer your question, I'm going to also deal with some of the things that were said earlier by both Pinaki and Manu. In politics, there's a phrase. It says, commit the hour, commit the man. In India now, it seems to be commit the crisis, commit the court. Because frankly, as Pinaki rightly pointed out, we had a situation where, despite several high-level committees specifically tasked with the situation of looking at COVID and how it grows, how it ebbs, how it comes back, somehow collectively in India, we missed the second phase. A few voices may have said, look, it's going to happen, but they were not heard. I think the problem not only is what Pinaki said, but also a certain subculture which seems to have creeped into both the government and the ruling party, which is to only look for good news. If you get a piece of good news, amplify it. If there's bad news, dodge it, avoid it. Don't bring it to people's attention. And the second phase is perhaps a reason of that one failure, the inability for people at the very top to digest in large amounts news which is unpalatable. See, instead of having a situation, and partly, of course, we go back to Narendra Modi's old thing, one country, one election. Partly the reason why this is happening is that the country every year faces one contentious election or the other at some state level or the other. And as a result of which, the polity is so divided that people are just going into this situation of every side putting forward either the good news that they can bring forward or the other side negating it by putting forward all the bad news. So I think first you have to just change that particular culture. Fortunately for us, the High Court functioned independently, functioned robustly. And as I gave you in my earlier part where I spoke to you about it, I could see from reading the various orders of the Delhi High Court, the nuanced way in which they approach the problem. Of course, they nudged the government. Of course, they made it step forward. And as Mukul rightly pointed out, yes, certainly, the government also pulled up its socks and then started galvanizing itself, and things have come to a better head. But we still can't be sure as to whether this will be enough to see us through the third pandemic, because the third pandemic, people feel, may well come unless everyone is vaccinated. And somehow at the moment, we find ourselves in a catch-22 situation where, frankly, there just may not be as many vaccines available as we would want them to be. And now I just want to take one point that Manu made, and a very important point, which is that you have to come, the courts now have to function at full force. Now, one of the things, as he rightly pointed out, is that whatever it is, the country is such, many Indias in one India, that there will be large parts of India which are not going to be technologically competent, where the courts and the lawyers will not have the necessary technology to function as effectively as you would want them to. So the answer is to vaccinate them. Manu gave a very good suggestion, which was that, look, Why don't the bar councils and the bar associations impose a compulsory levy? The other way to look at it is also that now in India, over the years, if you see several court orders, one thing one sentence is always there at the end of the judgment: parties to bear their own costs. Maybe the time has come when we need to change that. Maybe we should say that, all right, let the courts award costs. Award, you don't have to give exemplary costs, award substantial costs in every matter, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. And let that money go to a fund for vaccinating the courts and people around the courts. Something like that has to be done, because a party which has contested, has litigated, has already probably, especially if it's in the Supreme Court or in the Delhi High Court, spent lakhs of rupees on a particular case. Now, if he is lost, impose a cost of 25,000 on him. Let that cost go straight towards a vaccination fund. The Supreme Court has passed under Article 142 to pass such an order and direct it. Let the habit of imposing costs restart, and let that money go straight to a COVID fund.
Point.
So there are many things that you have to look at. This is going to be a long fought battle, and you have to deal with it innovatively on many fronts.
Point very well taken. In a sense, I mean, we could see courts getting back to normalcy if these things are done, which is actually the need of the hour. Litigation is piling up by the day. I think it's going to be a tsunami of litigation, and I hope our Chief Justice of India, Justice Ramanna, is going to have a tough time, because he is, in a sense, as he has taken over, the pile-up has happened because the corona crisis struck when the previous Chief Justice was there. So he is...
But Tarun, if I can come in here, I find that the Supreme Court has in recent weeks, and I'm sure people will agree with me, got a sort of a new life and a new energy. They've come in more robustly, at least on some crucial issues, than they had in the past. And I'm quite hopeful that this particular tenure will be a robust, successful, happy one.
Point well taken. I've got 6 minutes to go. Senior Advocate Mukul Rohgi and then Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. Justice Sikri famously said once on my show, it's the duty of the judge to nudge the executive and withdraw back into their Lakshman Rekha. Is this what the courts have been doing? Nudge the executive and come back? Senior Advocate Mukul Rohgi.
See, there is no doubt that the courts have done an exemplary job. So we don't need to go back on it. But see, the point is, you have to plan for the future. As Singhvi said, one is planning for the future in terms of infrastructure, in terms of hospitals, oxygen, etc. But I have a different take. My take is that you have to kind of start from the brass tacks, and that is this. You know, I have been reading a lot of articles which are very, very uncharitable to the Prime Minister. My personal take is that those articles are not in a correct perspective. The Prime Minister is the general. No general can win a war himself. The war has to be won starting from the infantry and the advisors, other generals, going up to the general. My personal take is that the bureaucracy, the committees, the other so-called experts, which were relied upon by the highest echelons in the government, have let down the Prime Minister. Of that, there is no doubt. If that is so, in my view, for the future, we need to have a relook or an audit of the fact for 70 years, we have followed the British bureaucratic system. Should we continue with it? Should we change it? Should we change it midway? Should we throw it out? If we throw it out, should we go the American way in terms of the bureaucracy? So those are things which need to be debated today, because just doing something today, you know, is like doing today, tomorrow again you'll have a problem. This is one aspect. Similarly, we have followed the common law system for hundreds of years. There is an alternate system, which is called the civil law system, which is prevalent in many countries led by France. The basic difference is that in our system, there is a lot of force on value of precedent. This has been done earlier. This must be followed till it is junked. Till it is junked can take years and decades, as we see lawyers, as we lawyers know. The civil law system does not have so much store, or they don't have so much reliance on precedent. Should we do that for courts? Should we have a relook at the legal system of having 4 appeals? Should we have a system of lawyers arguing endlessly for days together when this country or judiciary can ill afford the time? Should we have 500-page judgments which nobody can read? Or should we have 20-page judgments? If you see Privy Council judgments of the 30s, 40s, 50s, which are still followed today by the Supreme Court, an average judgment is 5 pages. Why is it that they could write 5 pages and our judges write 500,000 pages in big cases? Therefore, these are the things, according to me, which are required to be relooked by the judiciary, by the government, and to be led by Parliament. Because nothing can happen unless the laws are changed. So maybe you have a think tank of bureaucracy, Parliament, and judges together, and maybe the lawyers, to sit together and say that let us attack it on all fronts. And that's the only way that you could probably look at a proper future. And I have no doubt, and I entirely agree with Ryan, the new Chief Justice's tenure seems to be a new dawn. The despondency of the old has gone away. The new Chief Justice I have seen is issuing circular after circulars in the last 10-15 days on the working of the court. The latest being on the issue of mentioning, which is very, very important. Yesterday only I read a new circular that you will do it this way or this way or this way. I think the new Chief Justice is quite a practical person, and he will probably take the court on the right path. But you need everybody to come together to tackle not only COVID, but all other afflictions which this country or the judiciary is facing. These are my comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rodgi, for such a broad-based answer. You covered macro and micro governance and courts both. I'll go to Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi for the closing comment.
You see, today we have to have 2 views. One is the immediate short-term view dealing with COVID and avoiding a third phase, which requires a certain skill set and a certain approach, which is very important. But we must also have a long-term view so that this kind of situation which this nation found itself in this last wave of COVID does not repeat itself. Now, in our sort of divisive federalism and seriously divided polity, there are 3 or 4 areas where we can look at the long-term perspective, because without the long-term perspective, quick fix methods for short-term are not going to work. And this long-term perspective would require examining the system of elections. As they said, one nation, one election, so that once your election is over, you are only limited to governance. No other issues, no other criticism. That's one. 2 is our system of bureaucracy, their role, and how is it that you give them independence at the same time, nudge them to their full efficiency and competence. And 3 is a very important thing, that is the institution of the judiciary and particularly of the lawyers. Now we have, as Mukul rightly said, large, big judgments. The problem is that most of us will argue endlessly unless we are gently or robustly nudged and told that now you must stop. So we don't have that system of self-restraint as lawyers. So you have to have a system where you reduce the time which you take for coming, particularly to interim decisions. The problem in India is interim order takes all the time. Final judgments, you never reach them in a high court or court of first instance. There was a proposal a few years back, a few decades back, where it was said that, look, interim order should be given simply by saying, peruse document A, B, and C, stay given or stay declined. Of course, this is not a Ramban answer, but it does throw up possibilities, because then you move on to the real business, that is disposal of the entire case. Coming to the imposition, which is a very prima facie, a very good suggestion of Dr. Singhvi, that we must impose some kind of a cess on lawyers. I give you an example of voluntary imposition. Mr. Venugopal, our present Attorney General, was the president of the Bar Association of Supreme Court, and he suggested that every week each senior counsel in the Supreme Court should do one matter free. It worked after 6 months of that suggestion for the remaining 6 months of his period, and after that it was dumped, never to be taken up again. So we have to all introspect and ensure that we all participate so that in the long run, we have answers which ensure that we don't have the kind of a terrible situation which we had when we had the second wave of COVID. So it's not a simple one or two answer. It has to be a complete systemal overhaul.
Thank you so much. It's been a very fruitful two-part series. I'm sure the executive, the judiciary will have a lot of takeaways, as well as the civil society and citizens, interested citizens in politicians across parties would have a very good takeaway from these shows. I would like to thank Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi, Senior Advocate Mukul Rohtgi, Senior Advocate Pinaki Mishra, Senior Advocate Dr. Abhishek Manu Singhvi, Mr. Ryan Karanjawala, Managing Partner of Karanjawala and Company, for making time, coming all together. It was indeed a pleasure, and I'm indebted to each one of you that you could spare time and come together for this show. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, viewers, also for watching this show. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.